What's good, party people? This is According to Woods, and I have the honor and privilege of talking to a good brother. He is a combat sports strength and conditioning guru, as well as a athlete himself. He's the one, the only Ash Parker. Ash, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing, Adam? Thanks for having me on the show, man. I appreciate you.
I
Reaching
appreciate
out to me.
I appreciate you, man. You are a part of a team of a kid. I mean, we were kind of talking off air, but like a team that won a WBC World Championship.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, obviously, some time has passed, but it's kind of wild, isn't it?
Yeah, it's insane, dude. Like we were saying before, man. Like I didn't think I would ever be part of a team that could go that far, that could reach those levels. And like I've had like a lot of shots at it as being a team member with different athletes, with different boxers, different MMA fighters, but I never thought I would actually help out just whatever amount that I did to like help us get that WBC championship. So it was a beautiful experience.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely, and I mean that belt, and I'm kind of a belt mark. They say it in pro wrestling. I like belts, right? Their titles, whatever euphemism that you want to attach to it, because I feel, right, whether it be pro wrestling, MMA, boxing, Muay Thai, what have you, right? If you had people over at the house, right, you had a soiree of sorts, right, and nobody within the party knows exactly what it is you do. And if you're a fighter, and especially a world champion, you might have your championship, on the mantle, right? Might be a
Mhm.
conversation piece. What is that? And you're gonna tell them I'm blah 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 champion of the world, and this is whatever. Here's the lineage, and with the WBC belt, I mean, you don't have to look very far for its lineage because it's right there on the belt. So that's what I that's what I kind of hone in on, and that's actually one of the reasons why we met because you were wearing a WBC hat, which
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
pretty damn rare.
Yeah. Yeah. So this hat, do you want me to talk about the story? That
Yes.
okay. So I'm in my building and Adam and I'm wearing a WBC hat that the fighter that I worked with he gave me. So it's Mark Magsayo. And he basically I look over and Adam's kind of in the corner of the elevator and he's like, dude, she's like, is that a WBC hat? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, are you a WBC boxer? I was like, no, but I was a coach for one. And I told him like it was Mark. And then all of a sudden, I was like, "Oh shit, dude! I love combat sports. Like, it's my favorite thing." Like, and then that's how we kind of met, and we just were chatting about it a little bit. And then he's like, he reaches out to me, and Adam goes, "Hey man, you want to be on my podcast?" I'm like, "Of course! I'd love to talk about my experience with, helping Mark get the belt and being a member of that team." So yeah, it's awesome.
No, it is absolutely awesome. And again, the scarcity of these hats. I mean, the people who have this in their wardrobe closet, so to speak, right? It's the tippy top of what boxing can offer, even to compete there. At a WBC championship level. And to be a part of a coach, right? When you think about everybody that coaches, everybody that is a strength and conditioning person, everybody that boxes, right? And
Mhm.
the list gets fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer. And
Mhm.
when you think about it, there might be maybe about 100 people worldwide
Yeah.
that has.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, that's out of like the millions of hats that exist, right?
Right.
So yeah, it was a very crazy happenstance thing. I mean, it's weird. I just like I said, I didn't think wearing it would ever be like an advertisement or a billboard. I just kind of wear it because it makes me happy. It makes me remember when we went and got the championship for Mark. And this was, I guess the fight was in January or February. I don't
Right.
know. Time's been like crazy for me
Yeah.
recently, but he was fighting Gary Russell Jr. We went out to Atlantic City, and he won the belt. And I was just kind of looking at the belt, and I was looking at all the little details and intricacies. And Mark's, looking at me, and he's like, hey man, you see that hat over there? I was like, yeah. He's like, that's WBC hat. They only give that to, people who are competing for the belt. And he's like, I want you to have it. And I was like, really? Oh, that's cool. So that's my little trophy, my little hat trophy. Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it. My
Yeah.
goodness. And obviously, your title win with Mark, and especially after like COVID and all that jazz. Like, I mean, we've seen it wreak havoc in the lives of many fighters. There's a lot of amateurs that had to turn pro in not just boxing, not just MMA, but all over, just because that was you might have a fight in North Dakota, but you have to be pro, and what have you. So I mean, with all of that, how was it to not only compete for that title, prestigious title, but also come home away with it?
So like, Mark's been working a long time for that title. He did a lot of fights in the Philippines. He's a Filipino guy. He's under the promotions of Manny Pacquiao, helps him out a little bit. So, and he's kind of touted to be like the soon-to-be next Manny Pacquiao, which, it's possible, but there's only one Manny Pacquiao in the world. So, but he's worked a long time to get here, and when he came to the States, he jumped into wild card because of the association between Manny and Freddie Roach, and he just started training. And like after he had his first fight here, it was at Staples Center. It was a big guy. He was kind of guy was a lot heavier than Mark, and Mark beat him. And then they wanted to get more serious about training, and he had his second fight, and I was involved in that camp. That was his first time that I helped him out. And then he had his. Then we did our second camp, and then our third camp was with Gary Russell. So Mark's worked a lot in the Philippines, a lot overseas, and he's come over here, and he's the next greatest Filipino boxer. And I think his journey before he met me has probably shaped him more as a person. But his skill, he's become, like with every great boxer, they go to Freddie Roach and he just sharpens them and sharpens them. So his skill is getting sharper and sharper. And now is kind of the time in his career to start bringing in other coaches, like getting a good nutritionist and getting a good strength coach, and getting, what I do is, visual perception and reaction time training and response time training. So it's more of a cognitive based thing mixed with strength and conditioning. And it's just bringing in all of those elements to like make a champion, a new, big time champion. So all of that work he did early on, he's now kind of reaping the rewards. And when we went to the WBC and he's like, I think I'm going to, fight for the WBC belt, I was like, oh God, like this is stressful. Like I'm like 2 camps in with this guy, my 3rd camp with him, and he's already fighting for a WBC belt. And, personally, on my level, it was like, I'd have other fighters. Like I've trained Mike Lee. I've had like other younger professional boxers that have had title shots, and they weren't quite ready for it, or they were kind of on the tail end of their career. But this was kind of like the opportune moment where like Mark's starting to peak and he's starting to need more help, and he's starting to push himself a little bit better. His skills getting better. And so, he gets this WBC title shot against none other than like an epic fighter, Gary Russell Jr. Gary Russell is like, a great boxer. I don't want to take anything away from him. I've heard of him for a long time. And Gary, he's kind of on the tail end of his career a tad bit. I don't want to make any enemies when I say that. He's still a great fighter. He still has more opportunities to win. And he's an honorable fighter too. He's not disrespectful. He's, he appreciated Mark, and, that's kind of what you want to see sometimes in boxing. You want to see 2 warriors go at it and both of them respect one another. And I think they both did. And, I'm on the edge of my seat watching Mark compete for the WBC belt, and I'm just screaming and yelling. I couldn't sit still. I was like looking through the ropes and trying to watch, get every angle I could. of course, all the work we'd done in the camp, it was all over. There's nothing I could do, but nonetheless, you get just as anxious as the fighter does because you want him to win. You spent time with that fighter. You worked hard with that fighter, and he worked hard for you. So, yeah, it was a wonderful experience. So when he got it, we were just like, it was just awesome. We were just all extremely proud, and it's all because of his hard work, man. It's all because of his hard work and his team.
That's amazing. Now you mentioned the team aspect of it, right? And obviously you've been a part of camps and teams in different facets. Some fighters you basically mold from almost the jump, right? And
Yep.
then you come in with Mark, and you're literally, 2 camps in, he's fighting for a world title, a recognized world title. I mean, a recognized world title that has a lineage. I mean, almost 100 years, maybe about 100 years, if not more so.
I think it's like 90 or 80 years. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, but I mean, to get in, right, with the prestigious team, there has to be a balance of synergy, right? Because, like, not to say that they could get anybody, but like the team dynamic, and that's one thing that at times it could be the difference between world champions to maybe qualified and tenured journeymen, right? And that's not disrespect. It just some things work and some things don't. You've got guys and girls that can turn it on in the gym, but when it comes to the bright lights, it all freezes up, and vice versa, right? So how did you find yourself kind of coming into an established team, and how was that different?
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, you're like you have to, as a coach, you have to kind of experience all facets, like you said, of different levels of athletes before I think you can get the respect and the experience to work with someone that's a higher level. So he's already a developed athlete, basically. But all that, like, I've been working in my field for like 5 years. All of those, 5 years, I'd seen some high level pros, I'd seen amateurs, I'd see journeymen, I'd see like, people that are in completely different sports. So I had to learn, at all the levels of like, what's the appropriate training? What's the appropriate training for that? And then when you get a developed athlete that comes into your office and he's like, help me. Hopefully you have enough experience to where as a coach, you can handle it. So it was pretty crazy. Having this, great athlete come at me is really shocking. I was like, all right, let's see if we can do this. Like all boxers and most combat sports athletes, things can be really hectic on a team, especially when it comes with time management, and the fighter being pulled in all these different directions. Like here, we want you to talk with, Showtime or DAZN or whatever. And then we also want you to make weight every week up until the fight. And we also want you to do this strength and conditioning and then try this and then go to your PT. And then, and like, I was just like, I just need an hour twice a week with you, and everything else, like if we can just focus on that 1 hour, getting it in twice a week. And it took, honestly, the 2 camps before, like it took some time for us to like fit me in the schedule, just like it does with everything else those fighters have to do because they're pulled in so many different directions. So yeah, it was kind of difficult. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure if it did or not.
No, that's exactly it. And which I guess put an addendum to it. Which could you explain? Like the differences of maybe even starting somebody from the ground up to coming into an established and I mean obviously it sharpens even your skill set, especially your skill set about how to coach and train these fighters. But like, what are some of the differences
Between who?
so starting straight from the jump to or coming into an established team?
Okay, so like when you're working with a very young athlete, or like let's say like an amateur, with what I do is, like I said, I do reaction time training, response time, and work on their focus and concentration. You gotta first kind of assess the athlete, like either way, even if they're an amateur or if they're a professional. especially when you're talking about like combat sports, like assessing an athlete's visual skill, assessing their concentration, how good their peripherals, how good their depth perception is, how good their smooth pursuit, which is how the eyes move, left to right when they're following a moving object, and their vertical pursuit, and their saccades, which is when you look to the left and then you look to the right really quick. You have to measure those kinds of things at all levels. So when you're starting with an amateur, you got to realize like this is a combat sport athlete that probably hasn't had as many knocks as like a professional. When I say knocks, I mean like mildly concussive blows to majorly concussive blows to the head. So when you get those concussions, it really adds up. It adds up with the vision, adds up with the concentration and the focus. So when you get an older fighter, they're going to have had more knocks. So you're going to see more discrepancies with their visual processing speed. So the way their brain processes things. When you get a young athlete, you're going to see less disturbances. So the need switches when you're going with a younger, more journeyman versus when you're going with a pro. So the needs of the training when they're young is like trying to get good depth perception or trying to get good smooth pursuit. And then when they get older, it's like trying to maintain, good peripheral vision. Because as we start to age, our peripheral vision starts to shrink a little bit. And that's because we're reading, we're always on our phone. Every time you're kind of looking at a screen, you're reducing your peripheral vision. Like you're training your brain, whether you know it or not, to reduce your peripheral vision. So with, more developed athletes, I tend to kind of focus on like opening up their peripheries. And obviously, with sports like boxing, you would think like, well, why do they need peripheral vision? They're so close. Well, peripheral vision is anything that's 12 inches away from your face. So if it's 12 inches away from your face, you're going to use your peripheries. So for Mark, it was like enhancing his peripheral vision. And by, doing careful assessments on him early on, I could determine where to kind of approach, like where to kind of like jump in to help him out, where are his needs. And so that's kind of like the art of what I do is like knowing which exercises to do when and how to do them the right way to match the different levels of athletes.
That is so brilliant. I mean, you're an engineer, right? Engineering different game plans and ideologies, and even with the peripherals, because we learn our first kind of relationship with peripherals and the understanding of it is just like scanning across the room and seeing what danger might be lurking, right? And then we get into driving, and then you scan the road and see if there's any dangers or hazards or what have you. But just 12 inches from your face, like that's so much closer than what we would perceive of peripherals to be.
Yeah, like when you're on the inside, when you're fighting in boxing, you're using your peripheries all the time. Like when you duck in for a shot and you're, going to the liver or the body, there's always a chance of an overhead blow coming over this way. So what's really fascinating about the training that I do with, like my boxing clientele is like I have to like find targets for them to search for in their periphery and have them react to what's in front of them. So like if, Mark if any boxer really is having an issue with not great peripheries, it's pretty evident from our first day of training. I'm like, okay, I can see he can't see the target. He's not reacting quickly. You got to remember in sports like boxing, a punch is basically 100-mile-an-hour fastball. One punch, right? And so when you watch boxing, it's not just one punch. It's like 20 punches. like you see boxers, they will like literally just tee off and like go and hit as many times as they want or as many times as they can. And, like that's 0.25 seconds every time they punch, right? So if my boxer cannot react in 0.25 seconds to something in his periphery, he's going to get caught with a hook, he's going to get caught with an overhand, or he's going to get caught with an uppercut. So I always will work with their peripheries in all angles. So I give them, targets in their periphery to pay attention to. I say, look forward, just using your peripheries, just training your peripheries. balance on this thing, and I want you to react to something that's in front of you. So that's essentially how you would bring like a master level athlete or a higher level athlete to the next level, because we have to look at it this way, right? Like all boxers, all of them, even MMA fighters, all wrestlers, they all do what? Do strength and conditioning. They all train their body. They all do skill practice. They all have like a certain amount of skills and development in their body that they've done over a period of many, many years. So like when you have fighters like Mark, which is here, and you have Gary, which is here, they've all, kind of like physically trained their body and their skill set to like the max, right? So what's something that we can do to like push them just like 3% better or 4% better or 5% better? And, it turns out through the practice that I've been doing with like visual awareness training, concentration and focus, we can get like an extra 5%, An extra 5% doesn't sound like a lot when you're like a journeyman or an amateur, because it's not, because you've got more skills to learn when you're that age or when you're that type of athlete. But when you become a high level pro, 5%, 2%, like these are like milliseconds of difference, but that's what makes a difference. That's what can make the difference between, knocking somebody out or getting knocked out. And like, that is essentially what I've been doing with these boxers, is like, I'm just improving giving them that extra 5% when they're at, that level of mark. And it's paying off dividends when it comes to like game time, So yeah, that's.
No, that makes perfect sense, and it actually permeates even in jiu-jitsu. When you learn jiu-jitsu, they say it's a game of inches, right? The way that your hips are positioned and what have you. It's the difference between getting caught in an armbar and being able to kind of maybe walk and circle your way around it to like, oh, I got a separated shoulder, and that's just what happens, right? And but it's so wild, right? Because like, these are facets, and you've got your boxing fans, you've got your pro wrestling fans, you got your MMA fans, your jiu-jitsu heads, and even practitioners, right? But like, some of the same traits, and I think that's what if you're a practitioner of any sort, that's why we kind of start to develop a language with each other, and we kind of know what we're talking about, because there's a lot of the same aspects regardless of what you call the sport or what you call the combat, the means of the combat.
True.
There are some things that are non-negotiable that they are blanketed across the board.
Yeah. And the other thing is that you have to think of it like this. Like when you're doing a combat sport, not only is there like a certain amount of skill that's involved, a unique skill set to that sport, there's also like a lot of broad things that all combat sports have in common, right? Like a jiu-jitsu guy and a wrestling guy, I mean, the similarities are very similar, right? But when you take, a Muay Thai athlete and then you take a jiu-jitsu athlete, the training variables are very different for those two. Like, what does a jiu-jitsu athlete do differently from a Muay Thai athlete? Like a Muay Thai athlete, it's like speed chess. It's like boom, 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 quick, fast. I've got options. I've got knees. I got legs. I got hands. I got elbows. And, there's even like crazier kind of forms of Muay Thai where they use their head. Like you've got to play speed chess really, really quick. But then when you go to jiu-jitsu or wrestling, you kind of have a little bit more time, right? You have some time to feel out. You can almost do those sports. Like, I don't want to say that you could do them blindfolded, because you do need your vision for those things, but you can kind of feel out where you're going with those kinds of things. So the differences are there. But what is really similar is that all of them, they all have to concentrate at a high level. They all have to focus at a high level, and they all have to like really dial in to this, theory basically of like how people use their attention. So you have two types of attention. We call it flashlight and floodlight, right? So flashlight is when you get like super focused on this one thing. Like in combat sport athletes, they're like, I'm trying to land this technique in sparring. And I kind of put my like flashlight on to just get this like one little area, try to like work on that. And then you've got floodlight, which is like this super awareness, right? But what's unique is that about with all athletes that are doing combat sports is they have to be able to switch from flashlight to floodlight. They have to go from situational awareness to hyper focus and then back to situational awareness again. And so like that's one thing that's common across all martial arts is like if you don't have the ability to like get into the hyper focus and then kind of a relaxed focus and widen out and realize what's going on, you've lost. So like a lot of times, you know, you can say like two combat sport athletes are going at it, right? And like they're both physically there, but one guy loses something. Like what is it? He loses his focus, he loses a concentration, his attention, and then boom, he lost, right? So this is something that's common with all combat sports, and it doesn't matter which one. Like they all have to have that ability to zoom in, do this high intensity search and stare, and then zoom out, realize what's going on around them, realize what strategies are happening, and think quick. So yeah.
No, man, I could listen to you. You remind me a bit of Dr. Roman Velasquez, friend of the show.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I could like just sit and listen to you guys talk about the biomechanics for days on end and just soak it all in. And it's crazy. But were you always like this? Like you were an athlete yourself. Like what is your background? You know, pre working with high level athletes.
So I started as wrestling. I was always a contact sports guy. I did wrestling when I was in high school, and I started boxing when I was 16. And I was playing football, and I kind of went away from doing the boxing, and I just wanted to focus on football and wrestling. And when I got into college, I played rugby for a while, and then when I finished with college, I was like, all right, so I have this background in all these like contact sports. I can't just pick up a tennis racket or a racquetball, because I'd be like, hitting the thing so hard, it just like every time I would hit a tennis ball, when I tried it, it would just go like over the fence. It's like gone. And I'm like, I don't know. I just don't understand. I couldn't get accurate. I couldn't have that finesse. And so I was like, all right, so what other options do I have? So I jumped into all these MMA classes in Atlanta, which is where I'm from. I did like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for 2 years. This is when I was like 21. And then I did boxing and Muay Thai. And originally the goal was like, okay, I kind of like this Jiu Jitsu thing. I kind of like this like Muay Thai thing. I think I want to do MMA. So, but then of course, like all great combat sports, you get injured. With Muay Thai, I wrecked my knee with all the kicking and checking kicks, and like I was just in I was working on my my grappling there. What do they call it?
Clinch.
I was working on my clinch.
Yeah.
And I just throw a knee, and I twisted my knee weird. I threw a knee to his sternum, and I twisted my knee weird. And then I was like, okay, well, I can't do Muay Thai. My knee hurts too much. So I started doing boxing. And boxing is like one of the easiest things on your knee. Like I think like it's of all the combat sports, like boxing's pretty easy on your knees for whatever reason. And so I realized that I was like really fucking good at boxing. I was like, why am I good at this? This doesn't make sense. Like I've only done it once when I was like 16, but I just had the mind for it. And I think everybody has like a different kind of like mind for different combat sports. Like everybody should do martial arts in some form, but like I think some people are more dialed into like the striking. Some people are more dialed into like the grappling, and I was more for the striking. And so I started doing boxing with one of my instructors. His name is Randy Pogue. He was a tough little bastard from Philly. So he taught me how to be a tough, Philly boxer. And then I started competing at an amateur level with boxing. And then I did that for a couple years, and I was like, okay, I do like this boxing thing. I kind of want to do it. I don't know if I could do it professionally, but I want to try. So I did some exhibition matches when I came out to California, and they were fun, but grad school took me away from combat sports. I just couldn't get good grades and do fights at the same time. It was very contradictory. So I just kind of like went the school route, and then when I got out of school, I did like this great dissertation on MMA and mixed martial arts, and how to like how to do like strength and conditioning for those kinds of guys. And yeah, and then I ended up in like this great kind of like neuroscience like kind of world that's mixed in with, you know, strength and conditioning and kind of like visually training the athletes. And that's how I ended up here. So that was my background in athletes. That's how it kind of lands you into like coaching, basically. Let's do the system.
No, that's absolutely brilliant. And for me, I mean, it was a lot different, but kind of similar, right? Where I didn't compete. Like my family, we moved around a bunch, so I couldn't get into any classes or whatever. I always wanted to wrestle of some sort, being a WWF, WCW guy and whatever. And when you're like, oh, Atlanta, I'm like, WCW's stronghold.
Yeah.
You know, but I never stuck, you know, long enough someplace to get it going. And then also, you know, not a lot of money, right? You know, even judo classes are like $80 a week and whatever, free gi. But once I finally got into jiu-jitsu first, and then yeah, I did some striking classes in Fight Academy in Pasadena, but I knew, like, I love it. I love training. I love whatever, but like, I'm not going to be an elite. I'm looking at elites all around me.
Yeah.
But I could never be.
Right.
But how could I love this so much? I want to contribute somehow, you know?
Yeah.
And I had a little bit of a radio background, right? When I graduated from high school, went to, I mean, I was traveling on the bus from Inglewood to like Huntington Beach, like 4 hours each way. It was wild and whatever. We had a bus strike, couldn't go. They charged me 20 grand. Thought my radio career was over. But then knowing these people that I was training with that are getting signed to like Combate Global or doing, you know, stuff, whatever. And I'm like, hey, can I interview you? And whatever. And it's just worked out wonderfully.
That's awesome, man.
It's wild, right?
So when you started your first martial art, okay, so everybody does like exploration, right? Like explore all of them. What was your first like martial art? What did you jump into first?
It was karate, because Ninja Turtles, Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers, right? So karate, that was it. And then I was just like, I think that what got me, and mind you, like wrestling was heavy on the mind, right? I was just like, in karate, yes, like, you know, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Ninja Turtles, but I was like, I'm gonna be fucking Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and I'm gonna fucking chop somebody, you know, arm drag, what have you, right? And then the sensei was just like, we train so hard so you don't have to use it, and I was like, fuck that shit. I want to be able to kick somebody's head. Like that's what I'm here. So my mom was like, and luckily my mom worked for the rec center where all this was going down. She was like, how about judo? My mom from Fiji. How about judo, AJ? I'm like, cool. And I was loving it. I was like getting slammed, slamming people, uranagi, blah, 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 whatever. And then one particular day, like we were running late. I think my parents had gotten into it. I didn't get warm-ups, right? So I fucking took a uranagi and I landed on my fucking head, and that was not good at all. Oh, no. I stayed away from combat sports for damn near 25 years after that.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yes,
that'll do it.
Watched it, but fucking, you know, watched it, you know, Dan Severn coming to the WWF with like a bunch of title belts and Jim Cornette. I was like, oh my God, what is this UFC? Thought it was like WCW, different type of wrestling and what have you. And think about what we knew about combat sports then. You thought the guy at the end of the bar was the tough guy, you know, the Tank Abbott types, or the muscle-bound guy. You thought, oh, he's big, so he's a badass. He can beat the shit out of everyone, right? And, you know, but right, exactly. What we now know, but it's crazy. That was my introduction. But, I mean, what did you try first?
My very first was like, I was like, okay, I want to do something like that's different, you know? And there was an Aikido school in Atlanta. Yes, fucking Steven Seagal. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I go in. I'm like, oh, what is this? I'm like sitting there. They're all sitting on their knees. You know, it's like real traditional. They got their gi on, and like the Aikido gi is not like it's not like a good gi. It's like this big baggy thing. And the reason it's so baggy is that they love to like grab you and just like toss you, but everything's like simulated. It's all like, all right, so I need you to attack me here, like this, not like this, like this. And then I'm going to throw you. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right, cool. So I attack immediately, like the wrong way. And then they're like, no, you did that wrong. And I was like, okay. All right, so like this, and then I do it, you know, I attack the right way, and he fucking throws me like 6 feet across the room, you know, and I'm like, what? What happened? And he's like, all right, we're gonna do that 15 more times, and I'm like,
fuck up.
You're just gonna throw me? Is this? They're like, this is the way, you know. It was like, I'm like, all right, cool. When's it my turn, you know?
Right.
Like, so, you know, I give my shots in, and of course, it's your first day. Like, you don't know how to grab people. I was just like, dude, I was like 15. I didn't know like you could like manhandle people, and you know, they had all this tradition in it. It was all this like traditional stuff, which is beautiful in its own way. Like, I respect martial arts tradition stuff, but it was just so simulated, and it was so not real. Like, one day, the guy's like, all right, I want you to attack. He gave me that thing. I want you to attack me again at a diagonal angle on my neck. And I was like this, boom. And I just hit him in his chest. And he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, okay. That was the minute I knew. I was like, all right, well, what if somebody hits me like that? You know, like, I like, this isn't like real. Like, I got to leave. So I left. And that was my very first intro to like martial arts. It was right away, which I'm kind of like grateful for, right? Because it teaches you a lesson right away. It's like, you have bullshitters, and then you've got non-bullshitters, right? And so when you go into like a real jiu-jitsu class or a real judo class or real boxing class or a real, you know, any like with real martial arts or real MMA, then you start to realize like, oh, anything can happen. So you just got to be prepared, and you got to know what to do when anything does happen, right? So that's like one of those like wonderful stories. I love to tell like combat sports people, because I know everybody kind of has done a little bit, has had kind of very similar experiences with traditional martial arts, you know?
No, 100%. And it's wild that like you actually got one over on the sensei, right? Like you punched him straight in his chest, like, motherfucker. Like me, it was this. Like, this is block. I'm leaving all of this open.
Stay open. Targets everywhere.
And what are you doing? And I was just like, no, this can't be the way.
Yeah.
Oh, it's wild.
It was, you know, it's so crazy. It's so crazy. But like, when you really get into like the real stuff, you know, you start to really appreciate, you know, the like what martial arts can do for you. You know, when you get into the real stuff, you appreciate that, like that kind of concentration it builds, that kind of focus, and it teaches you to be determined. Everything hurts when you're doing martial arts.
Yes.
Everything. Like a real martial arts, everything hurts. Like your arms hurt at some point, your legs hurt, you don't want to move, you don't want to walk. Like, I remember amateur bouts I do where I'd be like, I can't feel my legs after this. Like, I just can't feel my legs. They hurt. And like, I can't move. And you just learn to just say, all right, like, I got to push through. I got to keep going. And then I applied that kind of stuff into my studies. And that was like kind of a turning point. So like, I wouldn't have gone to graduate school, or I was like one of the first people to get a master's degree in my whole family, right? Like, yeah, like I would never have been able to do that if I hadn't learned that real focus and real concentration, and like, pain is pain, deal with it, you know, like deal with it when it, you know, when it's bad, like there's some emotional pain, it's different, but like physical pain and like time and effort, and it teaches you those, like, to put in effort there, you know, and like, that's kind of what gave me, you know, a big turning point in my life. So I respect the arts.
No, 100%. And I think it's that's and it's becoming clearer, your insight, right? Because before your college sojourn, you already had life experience where you were doing these fights and what have you, right? And also knowing where it can conflict in your studies, and so you had real life experience. There are times where you see people training and training and training, and because they have like a promise to their parents, like, before I take my first fight, I'm going to get a degree and what have you, and they don't have that experience, right? And there are people that have done well. There's like the Rich Franklin, who was a substitute teacher and UFC champion, and look at Daniel Cormier. Like there are people that do it, but then also there are people that don't, like, the life skills are lacking, right? That's why you see, maybe fighters in all disciplines fight way past their sell-by date because they don't know how to do anything else because they don't have that context.
Right. And like, also what I've learned is that, having worked with athletes, just like some of the athletes that I work with, they are not designed for coaching. They're just not. Like, some of them have that in them, and some of them don't. Like Frank Trink's a great example of someone who he's a great freaking coach.
Yes.
That guy's smart. He's an intelligent. He can take what he's learned interpersonally and he can apply it to someone else, right? And so not every fighter can do that. Not every fighter can do that. Some fighters are just like, I just know what I know, and then like there's no way I could try to explain it to you, but there's no way that I could really get that across to you. So like some of them, I feel like when fighters kind of like fight past their time, when it's kind of over, they miss their peak. If they don't have like a double peak, like a Bernard Hopkins, crazy how like long that guy fought for and was still good. Then like, if they don't turn that into like coaching or teaching, then they have to do something else. So not everybody can kind of go in that direction. That's one thing I have learned, because I'll teach an athlete something and then they'll be like, I got you. And then like, I'll be like, all right, explain it back to me. And they're like, no, I'm not going to do that. No, can't really explain that. So yeah, it's kind of cool.
Some people are just wild, obviously, for better or for worse, you got John Jones, better for worse, we got Mike Tyson in his prime, like some people are just wild, they're just wild, and you let them be wild. You just you can't do a one size fits all. You gotta, whatever they're doing, and figure out a way to kind of curtail what you're doing, and basically be an attribute rather than a detriment. Because trying to get them to fit that way, that relationship is over. You're off the team and what have you. And like, sometimes you just need mother truckers to be wild.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Now you mentioned Frank Trink, which a friend of the show. He was actually one of the first people to do the podcast, and I know Frank because of he's still a referee, here in California, both amateur and pro MMA, right? And to me, it's funny, right? Like him and Chris Lieben, who are two of the greats. Lieben should be in the UFC Hall of Fame. Trigg is, right? And I'll see, when they're pulling somebody, like a KO happens, like amateurs here in California, amateur MMA, you can't strike, once your opponent is down. Once your opponent is down and non-responsive, that's a wrap, right? And then somebody will try and whatever, and you'll hear a coach tell the fighter, like, go get him and whatever. Yeah. And Trigg tries to pull him off, or Lieben will try to pull him off. And the 20-something-year-old fighter will like try to push the referee. And I was like, I'd rather fucking play in 4 or 5 in the height of rush hour. Like, people know, like, you have that context. Like,
I agree.
You fucked up, dude. Like,
I agree. That's like, that's a bad move. That's a bad move. You don't push Frank Trigg.
Yeah. And all of them, right? Like Trigg, Beltran, Herb Dean. Like, I roll with Herb Dean. Yeah. He's great, right? Yeah. I felt like a damn kitten in the paws of a gorilla.
Yeah.
Right? I thought I knew some shit or whatever. Herb Dean's a legit black belt, whatever. And we're rolling. And actually, like, comes in morning class, and this is like the Wednesday after he ref Ronda getting knocked out by Holly Holm in Australia, right?
Huh?
So he just comes in the role, right, into Fight Academy in Pasadena, East Pasadena, California, and the people. I was pretty new to the gym and whatever, but people who knew him, they rolled with him, whatever. I was just trying not to make eye contact.
Why?
Because I'm not that guy. I'm not trying to. I know I suck. I don't want Herb Dean to let me know I suck. Right? So then he motions. He's like, and I was like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So and then the bell goes, and we're rolling, whatever. And I just can't. It's just like a fucking wet blanket. I just can't.
Yeah.
Can't move.
Yeah.
Like, the extension of my arms are just that. That's all we're gonna be.
Yeah.
And the buzzer sounds. My fucking tongue is like a long red necktie.
Oh shit!
Whatever. And then he looks over at me and he's like, "You've trained before." And I had 6 months experience at another school in Bakersfield, California. And I was like, I should have really quit that day. I should have quit Jiu Jitsu. Like, it's never gonna get like International Brazilian Jiu Jitsu Federation champ. Fuck that. Herb Dean said I trained before. I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
So, going back to your experience, right? Mm-hmm. Like the fact that, you've been in camps, right? In various stages of fighters' career, right? But you've also been a part of camps and being the crown jewel of what all the efforts of what the camp is supposed to be for, right? Mm-hmm. Does that give you a nice bit of insight, right? That you've gone through it. You've been through the weight cuts yourself as an athlete, as a combat sports athlete. Does it help? The fact,
yeah, it helps. Yeah, dude, it's like the same language when you're speaking with them. And like, as a coach, who's vying for a professional, combat sport athlete's like time, when he says I can't make it, you can't take it personally. Because you know that, like, well, he probably can't make it because he's freaking exhausted because he's in a weight cut right now, or he's gonna show up and he's gonna make it, but his performance was not very good that day because he's in a weight cut right now, or because I know what this guy's been through this past week mid camp. Yeah, there should be a little. I mean, everything you get tired from that kind of training, and like you also can communicate like with the fighter and say like, hey, like you need to have good peripheries, and this is why you need to have good peripheries. Like, because when you're on the inside and when you start talking in that language, you start seeing them nod. They're like, okay, I get you. Like, if you don't have experience in combat sports and you're trying to coach a combat sports athlete, you're already kind of like you're out. Like you kind of like, you have to have gone through that. You have to have experienced that. You have to have experienced that kind of pressure of what it's like to perform as an athlete in that sport. And then now you can take what your experience is and you can kind of empathize with what the athlete is going through. And every good coach has that in common. They all have the ability to empathize with the sport that they, were competitive in. And it has helped me out so much. And that's why, with my company, which is Neurovision, we Neurovision Consulting, like my best athletes are my boxers. Now I have a ton of other athletes, right? Like I have Formula One race car drivers. I have like guys in the NBA. I have like, guys in the MLB that are like, top of the line, play for the Yankees, like all those sports. Like, but I don't speak the same language as those guys or girls do, right? Like if I coached a sport, like I coached volleyball, was a strength and conditioning coach for volleyball in Pasadena at SG Elite for a while. So I understand by watching volleyball, like what the demands are, but I don't really I can't really put myself in their shoe like I can with a boxer or a Muay Thai guy or an MMA fighter, because you learn their language and like it's part of you. Like if you're a good combat sports practitioner, whatever combat sport you practice, it becomes part of you. It's part of your heart. It's part of how you see the world. And like when you go to an athlete that's never done combat sports before and you start speaking like how we're speaking, it just flies over their head. They're like, yeah, I get it, but they really don't get it, because like if they're driving like a car around, 200 miles an hour around the road, and you start talking about peripheries and like being on the inside, like when you're in boxing, they kind of can understand, but it doesn't like ring true with them like it does with my fighters. And that's why my fighters are some of my best athletes that I've worked with. And it's just because I have personal experience in that sport, like 100%. That's what it is.
No, I think that's amazing. The way to find a way that's applicable to that person and what they're doing, which, I mean, it doesn't get any dicier, right, than weight cuts. You've got somebody that has expended themselves in every way, shape, or form, getting ready for this fight. Either you're developing skill set or just, basically, training for that specific fighter, right? You're depleting themselves in every way, of sleep sometimes, of food, nutrition, and what have you. So dicey things can happen, right? So without naming any names, this is not that type of show. We're not trying to dish the dirt, but I've heard some dicey things in and around weight cuts, right? What is some of the diciest things that you've heard or seen happen in your time in combat sports?
I mean, besides like none of the guys that I've worked with on a combat sports level have ever done these things, but the guys that I've trained with have, right? Like I've seen guys, take the diuretics where they literally lose all their fluid. I always, to all my fighters, I always say just do like water loading. That's the best thing. But like when you're at like the level of like the higher levels, like the WBC, they're going to hold you accountable to your weight cut, and they're going to make sure you're not like doing anything extreme, right? So they would take Mark's weight every week when we get closer to the fight. Okay, because they don't want him to lose 10 pounds the day before. Like that's one thing with MMA that like they need some catching up to do, because you have some of these MMA fighters, and I get why you can get away with it in MMA, but they have some of these MMA fighters that like cut like, 10, 15 pounds like the day before, or, that is horrible in every aspect for your body. It is like one of the worst things. Like you're dehydrated, you're in a state where you're not really consciously aware, like you're not sharp like you were before. Like I've done some risky weight cuts before where it's like, I'm just going to like put on my sweatsuit and go sit in the sauna for like, an hour to 2 hours, and I'm not going to drink water for like 3 days. I've done that, and I felt terrible. I performed at my worst. And so I don't know how a lot of these MMA fighters do it, but like a lot of them, they like to say, yeah, that's kind of like the fire that you have to get through to fight in MMA, but they just need a better system. They need a much better system. Like I think boxing has weight cuts figured out, because when you get those boxers like to their fight date, guaranteed that they're a lot better off, like performance wise as an individual, than like some of the MMA fighters, because I know those MMA fighters and they cut like 10 pounds, 15 pounds. I've even heard some of them like taking diuretics and cut 20 pounds off, like 20 pounds off, like 2 days before the fight. Like that's insane, dude. It doesn't matter. Like your body just can't rehydrate. It just can't rehydrate in the amount of time given, So, I think like I've seen a lot of them do that. I've seen a lot of them do like the hot baths. Like if like one of my guys is like having like trouble losing weight, they'll do the sauna suit and the hot bath, and that's kind of like an extreme measure. But like the safest thing to do is get you a good nutritionist, get you a good dietitian that has experience in weight cuts, that knows how to do it. Sometimes you have like weight cuts that are like weight cuts. Like if you can find a nutrition coach who's like worked with powerlifters, who has done like a lightweight cut, and you can kind of like integrate them into your team and maybe give them a shot. Like when you don't have too much weight you have to lose, like that's a good starting point. They'll gain experience. You'll know how they work. So it's a safer way to do it. So if you can't find a good nutritionist, then I would say go with water loading. Water loading is like the safest thing you can do. That's just cutting the carbs back and drinking 2 gallons of water a day for a few days, and then just stop drinking water like the day before, which still sucks, but it's better than nothing. It's better than sauna suit.
No, 100%. And I think that's one of the, yeah, that is exactly what plagues MMA, in all aspects of it, right? You sell a pay per view for 6 weeks or whatever, and like Friday before a Saturday fight, you realize, oh, that person can't fight, and if they fight, guess what? They're not at an optimal level. They just maybe skirted past the state athletic commission or wherever they're fighting or what have you, but they'll lose that title, they're whatever, because you're not, even the fans are going like, you could have your filthy casuals, and my goodness, I love the filthy casuals, but like, he wasn't the guy that I saw like in his last fight. Like, this is not championship level, performances. Like, what happened? And it'll come out later, within the next 3 to 6 weeks, right? Because it's not as guarded as some, boxing camps can be, right?
A lot of times it's just like this kind of like terrible weight cutting is done in like the kind of 10 to 15 fight range. Like, these are not fight, these are like local fights. Like when we go to Quiet Canyon, like those guys can be cutting weight the wrong way. Like you might see somebody who's really at risk, but at like the UFC level, you may not see these like crazy weight cuts. I'm sure it happens, but yeah. But like at a lower, like some of these professionals that are from their first fight all the way up to their 15th or 20th fight, I can guarantee you they're not cutting weight the right way. They're doing risky shit, or they're trying things, because maybe some of them have the blessed genetics where they can like walk around 5 pounds over their weight class and just cut a couple pounds. I'm sure it happens. But if you want a real competitive advantage, it's, you got to cut the weight, and you got to find the safest way to do it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Cut the weight, not the corners, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Oh, but we briefly mentioned it, your company, right? Near Vision LA, and what you're doing, is pretty astounding in terms of combat sports, especially in MMA and even boxing. Boxing is a legacy thing, right? And somebody's dad who's a trainer or used to box before, they might not, realize the cognitive ability. Same thing with MMA as well. So, like, what was the need to create this company, and where do you want to achieve?
Yeah, so you're very much right with everything you just said there, because now MMA, the difference that I've learned between MMA fighters and boxing is that boxing is old school. Everything is old school. Like, some coaches didn't even want their boxers to touch weights. They're like, I've seen like good strength and conditioning boxing coaches, like some of the best in the world, assign running programs. And I'm like, well, that's okay, but that's not really great for the fighter in the long run. You want a fighter that can fight for a long time, so you want to be healthy. So this legacy that you're speaking of, these are old school trainers. Now, MMA is more open-minded. Like, they're bringing in everything. Like, UFC tries everything. Like, they got that UFC Performance Institute down in Las Vegas. And I look at kind of the stuff they do, and I'm like, yeah, this is up to science. I mean, this is like good stuff. It's good practices. So, I get that, but getting across to the head coach is the hardest thing. Like, if you think the fighter understanding what I do with cognition and vision training, like, they'll shake their head and say, yeah, I know this. Like, they'll nod. They'll say, yeah, I know. I understand. This is why I need it. But explaining that to a head coach, be like, hey, I need your fighter for like 2 hours out of the week or 3 hours out of the week. And the head coach is like, well, what does it do? And I'm like, best example I can give is this, right? You get a boxer who seems good, like really good. They do good. And then there's that one fight they had where they got their ass handed to them. They were flattened. They were knocked out. And then all of a sudden, their next fights seem to kind of trickle down a little bit. Like, yeah, it was a good performance, but not so great. They do another fight, and then their performance goes down and down and down. Like, this is a story that repeats itself over time, right? Same thing with football, right? Like, you get a bad knock on the head, a bad concussion, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, the next fights that they were doing were never quite as good. So my job is to get more boxers, more combat sport athletes into, what I'm doing in order to avoid that down part of their performance. Like I want to, if they get knocked out, I want to look at their eyes. I want to look at their brain. I want to say, hey, look, this is where our problems are. This is how we're going to fix it. I want you to perform as long as we can into your 40s. I want a Bernard Hopkins. I want you to keep going, but I don't want a Bernard Hopkins with that ending. But I want a good fighter that's going to last a long time. I want your brain to be healthy. I want your eyes to be healthy. That's the most important thing when you get older, because as you get older, like with all fighters, they get stronger. They put on some weight. They get a little bit slower. They start going to heavier and heavier weight categories. Like the hits are going to start adding up over time, right? You're going to get heavy hits. You're going to get, and the older you get, the heavier the hits are going to get. And all those hits that you took back in your 20s, you can't take them like you can in your 30s. You can't take them like you can in your 40s. So my job is to push that athlete as long as I can with their vision, with their cognition, and push them to the next level continually. Every camp, get them to the next level. Keep working on their vision. Keep working on their focus, their concentration. Like, don't let that fall to the wayside when you're getting focused, as you're starting to age. It's an important aspect of, like, our neurological system is a very important aspect of, combat sports. It's kind of like training that last little bit that maybe we overlooked for a long time, and we can win some fights into your, your later years. Or if you're at your peak, we can make sure we can secure those wins, right? If you want a belt, if you want a belt, we can secure those wins, We can make sure, like, you are going to win. We can make sure your vision, your eyes, you're not going to make any mistakes. You're not going to miss any information when you're out there. So that's kind of what my goal is with combat sports. I want to push my company, Neurovision, further and further and further. I want to get more athletes, and I want more combat sport athletes in, because I know they are like the guys and girls who need that kind of training. So yeah.
No, I love it. And especially, you talked about, pushing the peak, right? Elongating the peak performance, into later years. But also one thing that I kind of have seen, and it's kind of become prevalent for better or for worse now, right? Where you still have to live after you hang up the gloves, right? And you have a wife and kids and whatever. And when you're active in your career, and your wife has to put in a restraining order because not that there's violence happening, but you think that there are people in the wilds coming to get you. That's like, and then like, 2 weeks later, they're fighting for world title against like a power puncher.
Yep.
Like, this is
right. Right. Fighting is one thing, but having a good life after fighting is a completely another thing. Like, that is like something that's very important. I always try to, like, I can say that to a head coach. I can say, hey, look, like, your fighter, he's a good fighter now. I want to make him better. But, I can tell him, like, what about after fighting? Well, a lot of times a head coach doesn't even think about that. They're not thinking about, like, well, what about when my fighter retires? Like, some of the good ones are, right? But like, they care for their fighter, but there's always falling outs between coaches and athletes for whatever reason. But like, it's important to have that kind of health, to still have your wits about you. I mean, I've met some fighters, like old fighters, dude, like really good ones that everyone knows. And like, you listen to them talk and you're like, shit, that's bad. Like, I don't want my fighters that I'm training with now to ever have to go through that. I mean, it was a sign of the times, right? Like, for them, like back then, nobody did this kind of training that I did. Nobody. I mean, when I got into this, the company was started in Switzerland. And like, I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what it was. I just applied for the job, and they interviewed like 60 people. I was like the 59th person that they interviewed, and they decided to go with me. They sent me to Switzerland, and I started learning about what it is, I'm going to be doing. And the title is a visual perceptual coach. It's a VPC. And we're blending strength, like I said, we're blending strength and conditioning and cognition together. And so when I started learning about concussions and what they do to the brain and what they do to the rest of the body, like a lot of older boxers, you'll notice their tongue gets swollen. Their tongue is like literally swollen. So they get like the weird lift kind of thing. And it's because they've had so much trauma to their head that their whole like mouth and all of the muscles in their mouth are swollen or it's paralyzed. And like I started learning about these things and I was like, oh, wow, okay. So I'm actually meant to like help these kinds of boxers and these kinds of fighters like and football players so that they don't have these kinds of issues. Because remember, the punches that hurt and the ones that knock you out are always the ones that you don't see. You never, like when you're looking at a punch and it hits you in the head, you're probably not going to get knocked out by it. Well, if you do, you'll have a less likelihood of getting knocked out by it than you would like if you were looking this way and you got hit, right? So visual awareness, situational awareness, those kinds of things are really important. And so when I'm training my athletes, I'm training them for that. It's a preventative measure, and it's also a performance enhancer.
I absolutely love what you're doing, and it's something that has been close to my heart because, again, when you're as close to the team and the fighter, and it's not just the fighter. We talk fighter, but it's the person. You know, just because there's somebody that's a CEO, that's not who they are. It shouldn't be who they are, or a trash man, or whatever your occupation is, right? It shouldn't be the death deal to who you are as a person. You should be the person first. But you know, you see it when there's the families. When you see the families, the wives, the significant, you know, the husbands, the significant others, the kids, and whatever, and you see this guy or girl get knocked out, and it's just like it hits to a different level. And that's one thing that I encourage. Like if you're good on the mic, fucking turn it into a podcast. Start creating content, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, develop other ways, because just like you were saying earlier, your coach is not going to not necessarily know past your fighting career what lay ahead for you, right? And if you win that world title, well, guess what? That's going to have people come to the gym, want to be trained, right? Exactly. So that's where that, you know, and I'm not saying that every coach is nefarious, because there's a lot of great introspective coaches that have been fighters themselves and had horrible things happen to them, and they try to steer their fighter away from it. But unfortunately, it still happens, right? So if we can get to a point where you can maximize your efficiency, right? Maximize your optimum performance, right? Then you don't have to go into the gas tank. You don't have to go into the garbage bag of tricks and figure it out. Or like, I'm gonna eat 3 to take 1, or are we gonna take 3 to you know, punch 1? Like none of that stuff will persist. Hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. You know, it's so true. Like a lot of times in like when you're an amateur, right? You are taking shots, and all you know is like, all right, I'm gonna have to take a few when I get on that. When I go in for this hard shot, I'm gonna have to take a few, but I'm gonna ignore it. Okay, that's cool. You can do that in an amateur, but when you get to a high level of these pro fighters, that doesn't exist anymore. It becomes, how do I avoid getting hit, and how do I do the most damage that I can do? Which is good. It's a respectable sport. It's a respectable thing about the sport. That's part of martial arts. Is like all that training, all that stuff pays off in like either a knockout or a decision, right? That's okay. That's great. But like, if you still have that amateurish mindset, that journeyman mindset, where it's like, I'm gonna have to take 3 to get my one in. It's gonna be a good one, but I'm gonna have to take 3. Yeah, you're on a pathway of like self-destruction. and it's like the same thing in like wrestling and jiu-jitsu too. Like, I'm gonna shoot and I may get caught with something, but I'm gonna take this risk. Everything's about risk, right? So if you can do something that can mitigate that risk in any shape or form, especially when it comes to something as crazy and awesome and maddening and wild and important as in the world as combat sports, you have got to like mitigate as much risk as possible. And you've got to train your ass off, push yourself to your limits, but do it in a smart way. Don't get yourself caught with something that you didn't see coming, you know? So that's kind of my philosophy. Yeah.
No, 100%. That applies to punches, kicks, takedowns, Imanari rolls, what have you, child support. I mean, everybody wants you when you're the champ, when you're in the in the decline. It doesn't, the bills pile up and the children still happen. It's just weird. The cognitive ability goes, but then under the belt, it works.
Oh, yeah, and I wanted to buy that motorcycle after I got that belt, or maybe a new Ferrari. Why not 2 Ferraris? Actually, that sounds good. Sounds better to me. Okay, like you're in the school of boxing, bro. Not finance. Back off.
Yeah. No. And I just appreciate you having the experience yourself, right? But also knowing where to apply all your entire skill set, your love, your obvious love. It exudes out of you for this sport, this proliferation of human existence. I mean, we've fought since the Pantheons, right? Yeah. Even before that, the Cro-Magnons, like this is who we are as a people. And as we get further and further away from it, that's where discrepancies happen, right? Like that's for me, right? Like, oh, you're not if you've got an Apple product, right? Well, guess what? Steve Jobs, anybody who worked with him didn't dig him. It wasn't good, right? Yeah. But he wasn't a fighter, so to speak, right? He was a mind, but because he didn't have that carnal fucking approach to his life or whatever, he took it out on everybody. His family, right? So we have that about us, right? So the more that we express it, I think, in healthy ways, right? Now, obviously, not domestic violence, not running into a pregnant lady and realizing your cocaine is in the car and the whatever, and running back like the gazelle to get it, and then running back off into the night. Like and I'm not speaking about anybody, but I might be speaking about.
I don't know.
That was kind of specific. But like JoJo's, man, love that guy. Like what he brought to fighting and everything like that. But it's his legacy is marred. I don't want any of and it's becoming our friends, right? It's not just our favorite fighter. It's becoming our friends, right? To suffer those same things, to end up on a TMZ headline for auspicious means, inauspicious means. Like that's the worst.
The worst.
So I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. And what I think is so crazy is that clearly you have this passion for these kinds of combat sports. I could tell you grew up watching WWE, WCW, Body Slam. You were like, hey, cuz, let me try that fucking suplex on you, bro. Like I could tell. I could tell. And all of people who practice combat sports have that. That's why, I think professional wrestling still exists, right? It's so good to watch it. It's so entertaining to watch it. And, you have, your great athletes like Conor McGregor who bring in that personality of, who's that dick? I want to punch that dick in the face, or I want to cheer him on, This is, it's a drama that we've had for generations, right? Mm-hmm. Generations and generations, that just speaks to us. That's almost like a Shakespearean thing. That speaks to us, so when you watch fighting and it's really entertaining, it's tapping into that primal instinct that you got and that you had when you were a kid. And I hate it when people say, oh, I don't like that, it's too violent. I'm like, well, come on, man. Of course it's violent. That's the point. The point is that violence is awesome sometimes when it's done with rules under specific regulations. I know, I'm getting more specific there, but it's great. It's great.
Oh, not even that. Yeah. Didn't Jackass do epic numbers in the box office? Yeah. Isn't it doing epic numbers in fucking Paramount Plus? With the Jackass guys on WrestleMania? Yeah. And fucking Johnny Knoxville at 52 years old getting a win over a legit wrestler?
Yeah, these fuckers are jumping off buildings and getting hit by cars, and people are like, whoa, that's great entertainment. And I'm like, you're telling me you like Jackass, but you don't want to watch real fighting? Like, come on, real fighting is so much better. And like, of course, that's why I said everybody should practice some form of martial arts, because when you practice it, not only do you learn interpersonally who you are and learn what you're capable of as like a person, like willpower and heart and all that stuff, and you get confidence about yourself. You also can kind of relate when you're watching violence, and like it's not as horrible as you might think it actually
It's not
is.
as abstract, for sure.
Yeah. It's more like, I don't know. It's like I'll watch a pro MMA fight. Like I went to Carson on Sunday, and I watched some great pro MMA fights. I was there with my girlfriend, and I was there with my buddy who's a black belt in Jiu Jitsu, and his wife. And we're just watching our girlfriends like, how are you guys gonna think? What are you guys gonna think about this? You know what I'm saying? Like, and my girlfriend is like, this is fucking awesome. Like, I love this. And I'm like, that's why I love you. High five.
Yeah.
Like you responded the way you're supposed to respond to that, you know? Like you're listening to that inner child that says, yeah, I want to see, you know, I want to see like Kane like fucking choke slam a dude right in front of me, or I want to see the Undertaker like and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like, I want to see the battle. It's going to be awesome. Like, yeah. So I like that. I mean, you know, that's people respond to it the right way. They're healthy people.
Hell yes.
No,
I
shy away from it that are like, oh, this is bad. Like, I'm like, no.
you don't understand, right?
Yeah.
Or go watch a fucking action movie with like fucking bodies and shit like that, or listen to like death metal or whatever the fuck. And like, you're not. Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
They'll listen to like a hardcore like rap song where it's like, God damn, you just killed like 5 people in that rap song, and you pistol whipped the dude. Like,
yes,
you're not to that, but then when you watch like MMA, you're like, ooh, that's bad.
Yeah, it's the Drake meme about the. Yeah, that's what
I've been like obsessed over this Will Smith. Oh my god, dude.
Oh, I got stuff. Your DMs are gonna get flooded, bro. I'm sorry.
But send me all of them.
Yes. No, but I definitely thank you for doing this and taking the time to do this. Obviously, Ash, for you to get where you are, you had a throng of supporters to support every endeavor. Like, it couldn't be easy. Like, hey, mom, dad, I'm gonna be a fighter.
Yeah.
Or I'm gonna go to the college and I'm gonna be the first one to do it and all that stuff. So obviously, you had both professionally and personal a community to really raise you up to where you're sending your tentacles into your own community and really uplifting everybody in it. So I want to take as long as you need. Let's get some shout outs out of the way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to, you know, like, as far as shout outs go, like, my dad has been like a huge thing in my life. He's like 93, and I take care of him now. And so he's like my number one. Like, he's my number one. My girlfriend, she's really, really supportive. Her name is Tammy, and she's awesome. And some of the guys that I've studied under as far as neuroscience goes, like, I've studied under like a guy named like Ramon. Gosh, I can't pull out his last name, but the whole neurovision, Ramon Bordas, and he's, you know, taught me everything I know about neurovision, and like he's awesome. He's been a great, you know, very knowledgeable person. He's an ophthalmologist, and Sean Hampton is the physical therapist for Mark Magsayo, and he's one of the reasons why I met Mark. And I used to work with physical therapists, so we speak the same languages as well. And Freddie Roach, obviously, man, that guy's like, he's a forever king of like boxing. Like, he's a great guy, very personable, awesome guy. So Freddie's been like a big influence as far as like help getting Mark to that next level, which, you know, like I said, like, it's not about me when we're training the athletes, it's about the athlete. And so like they're like, they become kind of like your kids in a way, and you just want to see them succeed. And like Mark wouldn't be where he was if it weren't for Freddie and his wife, not Freddie's wife, Mark's wife, Frances. She's a wonderful person. Yeah, man, that's what got us to like the WBC championship. That's my team. And then he's got his team, which is like a nutritionist and all his other guys, and then me and another strength coach and Freddie. So that's who really, that's a lot of people think like making a champion is like, it's just one guy that's doing the whole work, but they have a huge team, all of them. They have a big team. They have a physical therapist. They have nutritionists. They have head coach. They have a secondary coach. They have a cut man. They have another coach like me, and they have their own wives or their own, people. Like those people is what makes a champion. So it's not just one person. One person gets the belt, but it's not just one person that earns that belt. So, yeah, really, really, really awesome experience with that. And so, yeah, is that kind of what you're asking? Yeah. Also, yeah. I mean, Neurovision has been great, and so yeah, you can always like ask me any questions. You guys have anything about fighting or cognition or visual perception or anything like that? You can always like DM me. I'm at like APARKE 42. So yeah.
I was just gonna say, where can people find you on social media? But
yeah, APARK 42. And it's Ash Parker, or you can find me on the Neurovision IG. We have a Facebook, but I don't really do the Facebook thing. I just do IG. Neurovision LA is the link, and you can find that on my profile as well as finding me on Instagram.
And wherever you may be watching or listening to this, I've linked it right there in the bio. So I kind of made it easy for you guys because Ash is a wonderful person. Like, he didn't have to do this. He took a time out of his Thursday just to sit and talk about fights and everything like that after meeting me randomly in an elevator.
Yeah. And honestly, dude, you're great. You're great, Adam. Like, I really appreciate you, man. Like it's so random how we met, but like, dude, you are a great person to know, man. Like your understanding of combat sports, the world, like we said, dude, it's like we've already known each other for a long time because we speak the same language. And that's what's beautiful about combat sports. I'm this white boy from Atlanta. And where are you from, Adam?
I'm from San Francisco. Half Fijian, half American black from San Francisco.
So but that's the beauty of combat sports, man. So like you having guests like that and putting people on like that, it shows the world that like there is like, family that's there. You do speak the same language, even though you can be completely different. It's like you can tie them together, and that's awesome about what you're doing, man. So,
I really do appreciate it. It's stories like yours. It's athletes. It's people that for me, we talked about pro wrestling. It was just like there's no better way to as a value creation, to teach a kid. You get your ass kicked 364 days out of the year by your foe, and then you get the biggest stage of them all, a WrestleMania type setting, and you get to beat the shit out of your foe, get this gold belt that also signifies that you're the best in the world at what you do. Like, right. That's it, And to your point, you said, it's the village that makes the champion, right? And that's a little addendum to what we've always known, right? It takes a village to raise a person, right? But that person could become a world champion. And that's not just in combat sports. That could be a lawyer, a doctor of medicine, a CEO of a company, a startup something, an artist and what have you. And that's, I just feel very fortunate that people have allowed me to come into their lives, and also the people that are subscribing to this very podcast, that they allow me, with the people that I bring, to bring joy to their lives, hopefully.
Well, part of that is your personality, man. I could tell you're a warm person. You're a warm person. And so people can feel that, they can feel that. Like we oftentimes we watch the podcast like the Joe Rogan, or, I think I watched another one, Carrie and Sam. And you can just feel when there's warmth in the voice, you can feel the warmth in the personality. And when you're passionate, that warmth comes across. So that's one of the things that makes you really awesome, Adam, is that you have that warmth about you.
You're going to make me cry. I'm just saying. Mari Yamasaki's here. No, again, Ash, thank you for taking so much time to speak with us here. And Tiltbrook, it says great as always. I appreciate it. This is just like, yeah, this is love fest. But also, thank you guys for joining us here at According to Woods. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and even Twitter. I mean, Ash, you're subscribed to the podcast, aren't you?
Yeah.
Hell yes. So be like Ash, the badass that he is, and go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. But if you don't believe me, you don't believe Ash, and I don't know why you wouldn't, well, here's MMA fighter and pro wrestler Zeta Zhang to help convince you.
Hey, this is Zeta Zhang. Make sure you subscribe